From the window of her small Manhattan apartment, Elizabeth Foster watched her son Noah playing in the schoolyard. The gentle October sunlight made his brown hair shimmer with gold. To Elizabeth, her son was the center of her world. Since her divorce 7 years ago, she had raised Noah on her own. "Noah, snack time," Elizabeth called, opening the apartment window. The 10-year-old boy turned around, waved with a smile, and immediately ran toward home. Elizabeth returned to the kitchen and prepared a simple snack: milk and homemade cookies. Her income as an accountant wasn't much, considering the cost of living in New York, but she managed wisely and could provide everything they needed. Though lacking luxury, their apartment was a warm home filled with love. The door opened, and Noah rushed in. "Mom, I got a perfect score on my math test today." Elizabeth embraced her son. "That's wonderful. Your hard work paid off." She ran her hand through his soft hair, searching for familiar features in his face. Noah looked very much like his father, Alexander Chase. Sharp blue eyes, defined jawline, and an intelligent expression that indicated his brightness. While Elizabeth took pride in these traits, she was careful to ensure her ex-husband's name was never mentioned in public. "Mail came," Noah said, reaching for a cookie. "Looks like it's from Aunt Caroline." Elizabeth frowned. She rarely heard from her sister. They had been close as children, but since college, Caroline had pursued a better life, and their relationship had grown cold. Opening the envelope, Elizabeth sighed. It was a wedding invitation. Caroline was getting married to Bradley Smith, a successful investment banker. The invitation was on thick, expensive paper with gold foil, so typical of Caroline. "Is something wrong?" Noah asked. "Your aunt is getting married," Elizabeth smiled. "We're invited. Are we going?" Noah showed curiosity but seemed a bit anxious. He had only met Aunt Caroline a few times, and each time she had barely acknowledged him. "Of course," Elizabeth answered. "She's family." As she read further through the invitation, she noticed a small note enclosed. To Elizabeth. "For seating arrangements, you and your nephew will be placed at the edge of the venue, not at the family table. You understand, don't you? Most guests are elite. I want to make a good impression on Bradley's family." Elizabeth's hands trembled. She slipped the note into her pocket, hiding it from Noah. To conceal her hurt feelings, she smiled brightly. "We'll need to think about what to wear," she said. "It's not often we get to dress up in nice suits." That night, after Noah went to bed, Elizabeth called Caroline. "Thanks for the invitation," she said calmly. "But why can't we sit at the family table?" On the other end, Caroline laughed lightly. "Elizabeth, be realistic."
Can you imagine making $10,000 a month just from YouTube, all from home? That's exactly what I did with Reddit Stories. No face, no voice. Check the link in the description if you're curious.
Bradley's family are all successful people. You're just a single mother who divorced her wealthy husband. This is the best I can do. Be grateful you were invited at all. Caroline, we're sisters. Yes, but our worlds are completely different. You need to accept that. After hanging up, Elizabeth quietly cried. But she quickly pulled herself together. She had to be strong for her son. The next morning, Noah noticed his mother's red eyes but said nothing. Instead, he hugged her and said, "Mom, it's okay. We're family." Elizabeth hugged her son, grateful for his wisdom and kindness. "Yes," she smiled. "We're family. That's what matters most." On the morning of the wedding, Elizabeth's apartment was filled with tension. She stopped in front of the mirror several times, checking her appearance. Her dark blue dress was purchased 3 years ago, but it gave an elegant, understated impression. She adjusted Noah's black suit and straightened his bow tie. He squirmed uncomfortably. "Mom, this is tight," Noah complained, tugging at his bow tie. "Just a little longer," Elizabeth smiled, fixing his hair. "Today is Aunt Caroline's special day. We need to look special too." Elizabeth wondered inwardly why she cared so much. Caroline had never considered her feelings. Still, she had no intention of ruining her sister's wedding. "The taxi's here," Elizabeth said, looking out the window. She took Noah's hand and took a deep breath. "Ready?" "Yes," Noah answered. "But are you okay, Mom?" "Of course," Elizabeth forced a smile. "Perfectly ready." When they arrived at the luxury hotel in Brooklyn, it was already filled with expensive cars and limousines. An elegant sign reading, "Smith Wedding," stood at the entrance. As Elizabeth and Noah entered the lobby, they immediately felt out of place. The guests were obviously wealthy, with women wearing designer dresses and men in custom-made suits. Walking among them, Elizabeth and Noah felt like outsiders. "Elizabeth? I can't believe you actually came," Caroline's voice came from behind. Elizabeth turned to see her sister, who had just emerged from the bridal preparation room, already perfectly ready. Her hair was intricately braided, her makeup flawless, and she wore an elegant silk robe. "Of course I came," Elizabeth said gently. "You're my sister." Caroline sighed softly. "Well, I honestly thought you wouldn't come. Especially considering the situation." She looked Elizabeth and Noah up and down. Elizabeth struggled to suppress her discomfort. "Noah, you've grown so much," Caroline said formally. She lightly patted Noah's head, but her eyes remained cold. "Bradley's niece Madison is here today. She's 12. A bit older than you." Noah smiled politely but said nothing. Elizabeth placed her hand on his shoulder. "Your seats are as indicated in the note," Caroline continued. "Could you be seated before the ceremony begins? We have a photo session, and family will wait at the front." "Aren't we family?" Elizabeth couldn't help asking. Caroline laughed. "Of course, technically you are. But this is for immediate family and close friends. You understand, right?" She was called by a bridesmaid and turned on her heel to leave. Elizabeth felt her face grow hot. "Let's go, Noah," she said quietly. "Let's find our seats." They were led to the back of the venue, a spot hidden behind pillars and barely visible from the main tables. On their table was a small card that simply read, "Elizabeth Foster and guest." Not even Noah's name was included. "Mom, I can't see anything from here," Noah said disappointedly. "It's okay," Elizabeth squeezed his hand. "At least we're together, and that's what matters most." For the next hour, they quietly observed other guests arriving. Bradley's family were all well-dressed and dignified. Especially his father, Joseph Smith, with his silver hair and perfectly tailored tuxedo, looked as if he had stepped out of a movie scene. "Oh, you must be Elizabeth and Noah," a voice said. Elizabeth turned to meet an elderly woman in an elegant dress. She was Victoria, Bradley's mother. "Yes, nice to meet you," Elizabeth replied politely. "Caroline told me about you," Victoria said, her voice carrying a note of refined sympathy. "Divorced, it must have been difficult." Elizabeth maintained her smile. "We're doing fine." Of course, Victoria clearly didn't believe it. "Anyway, I'm glad you came. Caroline is becoming part of our family. She's perfect for Bradley. They're both ambitious and forward-looking." The implication, unlike Elizabeth, was clear. "Mom, look," Noah said in a small voice. Elizabeth looked toward the entrance. Madison Smith entered with several children. She was a typical wealthy child, wearing an expensive pink dress and already exuding a maturity beyond her 12 years. When she saw Noah, she whispered something to her friends. They all giggled, occasionally glancing at Noah. Madison approached Noah's table without hesitation. "So you're going to be my cousin?" She looked at Noah with cold eyes. "Where did you buy that suit?" "At a department store," Noah answered honestly. Madison exchanged glances with her friends and giggled. "I thought so. It looks cheap. No brand, right?" Elizabeth was about to stand up to defend her son, but before she could, Noah answered in a surprisingly calm voice. "I think how people behave is more important than where they bought their clothes." Madison blushed and left with her friends. Elizabeth looked at her son proudly. "Well said," she whispered. "You really are a wonderful boy." Just before the ceremony began, Bradley's father, Joseph, took the stage and picked up the microphone. "Thank you all for gathering today on this special day for my son Bradley and his bride Caroline," he said in a dignified voice. "The Smith family has been a lineage of successful people for generations. And today, I am pleased to welcome another successful person into our family." He continued, "This marriage is a union of two strong families. A bond between families that have succeeded, contributed to society, and established high status." Elizabeth understood that these words deliberately excluded her. She sat quietly, squeezing her son's hand. Noah looked up at her and smiled softly. In that moment, she thought, no one can break their bond. True success wasn't about money or status, but about living with love and dignity. The ceremony began, and Caroline entered on her father's arm. She was indeed beautiful. Elizabeth sincerely wished her sister happiness. After the ceremony, the reception began. Elizabeth and Noah sat at a round table in the back of the venue, watching the lively conversations of other guests from afar. Their table was filled with people clearly deemed unimportant, distant relatives of Caroline's and lower-level company employees. "I'd like to propose a toast." Joseph Smith stood up, raising his champagne glass. The venue fell silent. "Caroline, whom we welcome into our family today, is truly a woman worthy of our family. She is intelligent, elegant, and above all, has an unwavering will to succeed." He smiled at Caroline. "She comes from a good family and has always aimed high. To the bright future of the Smith family, Caroline, and her family." Elizabeth smiled ironically. Good family, did he mean their middle-class home where their father ran a small real estate company? And her family clearly didn't include Elizabeth. Noah quietly asked, "Mom, why are we here? No one is talking to us." Elizabeth took her son's hand. "Because we're family, Noah. Even if others don't recognize it, we are family." At that moment, one of Caroline's bridesmaids took the microphone and said with a laugh, "Now, let's hear a few words from the bride's sister." The venue buzzed, and many eyes turned to Elizabeth. Caroline was visibly upset, grabbing the bridesmaid's arm and whispering something. "Oh, I'm sorry," the bridesmaid blushed and corrected herself. "We'll hear from the bride's best friend." Elizabeth felt her face grow hot. This was a deliberate insult. When she looked at Noah, he was watching her with sad eyes. "Don't mind it," she said softly. "It's fine." As the reception progressed, Elizabeth and Noah became increasingly isolated. The other guests at the table barely spoke to them, occasionally casting sympathetic glances. "Who are those people?" Voices from other tables reached them. "Caroline's sister and her child. A single mother, I hear. My, what terrible clothes. I can't believe those are brand name. She's so different from Caroline. Made the wrong choices in life." Elizabeth tried to ignore these words. she maintained her grace and dignity. As the cake-cutting time approached, guests began gathering around the main table. Elizabeth and Noah remained seated. "Aren't we going?" Noah asked. "We can see from here," Elizabeth answered quietly. "Let's avoid the crowd." But the real reason was that she feared Caroline would hurt her further. Suddenly, Madison approached their table with several children. She wore a malicious smile. "Still here, cousin?" Madison looked Noah up and down. "Is your mother avoiding being in the photos? Or is she embarrassed by your clothes?" Her friends giggled. Noah remained silent, staring at them. "Really, your clothes are so cheap." Madison laughed loudly. "My dress cost $5,000. How much was your suit?" $50. As Elizabeth was about to stand up for her son, Caroline approached. She placed her hand on Madison's shoulder. "Is something wrong?" Caroline asked in a sweet voice. "Aunt Caroline, I was just asking Noah where he bought his suit." Madison put on an innocent expression. Caroline looked coldly at Elizabeth. "Elizabeth, don't interrupt the children's conversation." "They're not conversing, they're mocking my son," Elizabeth said quietly but firmly. Caroline sighed. "Children are just honest. Elizabeth, be grateful you could come. Our worlds are different." She snorted. "It's not my fault you couldn't maintain your former standard of living." Elizabeth's heart sank. She had been patient all along, trying not to ruin her sister's day. But Caroline was treating her like an exhibition at the ceremony, an object of pity. She silently took her son's hand. His small hand gripped hers tightly. "Damn it," Noah muttered under his breath. "Noah." Elizabeth scolded her son. "See, no manners either," Caroline said triumphantly. Elizabeth looked at Caroline and said quietly, "You've changed. I remember the old Caroline. That kind and thoughtful girl before college." Caroline seemed momentarily disturbed. But she quickly regained her composure. "People grow up. I understood my worth." "Yes," Elizabeth said sadly. "You put a price tag on yourself." Caroline's cheeks reddened. She was about to say something when suddenly, there was the sound of a car outside the venue. The heavy, distinctive engine sound of a luxury car. Everyone in the venue fell silent for a moment and looked toward the entrance. Bradley grabbed Caroline's arm and asked, "Do you know who that is?" "No," Caroline answered, looking confused. "There are no unscheduled guests." A car stopped outside, and a photographer hurried to the window. "It's a black limousine," he reported excitedly. Elizabeth looked at Noah. Her son's expression suddenly changed. He turned to his mother and smiled slightly. "It might be Dad." Elizabeth's heart raced. "No way." The main door opened, and a middle-aged man in a perfect suit entered. He was dressed like a typical luxury car driver, in a black uniform with white gloves. He surveyed the room and walked straight to Elizabeth and Noah's table. "Young Master Noah," he said respectfully. "It's time." Caroline's face turned pale. Madison stood with her mouth open. Joseph Smith stepped forward, looking confused. "Excuse me, but who are you?" he asked. "This is a private wedding." The driver glanced at Joseph for a moment, then turned back to Noah. "Young master, your father is waiting." The venue froze. All eyes turned to Noah and Elizabeth. Caroline grabbed Bradley's arm with trembling hands. Madison backed away in shock. Elizabeth looked at her son. Noah's expression showed a confidence and calmness she had never seen before. He slowly stood up and nodded politely to the driver. "Can you ask Dad to wait 5 minutes?" Noah said in a surprisingly mature voice. I need to explain to Mom. The driver stepped back respectfully and replied, Of course, young master. Elizabeth stood and placed her hands on her son's shoulders. Noah, what's going on? She asked quietly. Noah looked up at his mother with an apologetic expression. I'm sorry, Mom. I've been in secret contact with Dad. When I told him about today, he said he really wanted to come. Caroline approached the table on shaking legs. Her perfect makeup was beginning to crumble. Elizabeth, what kind of joke is this? Her voice mixed with irritation and fear. Elizabeth stared at Caroline. The confidence she had hidden for years returned to her eyes. It's not a joke, Caroline. Joseph Smith came forward with Bradley. I want to know clearly whose car that is, he said in an authoritative voice, but there was anxiety in it. The driver took a card from his pocket and handed it to Joseph. Joseph took it and his face changed in an instant. Chase. He stammered. It's Dad's car, Noah said quietly. Alexander Chase's car. A murmur arose from the venue. The name Chase was known to many. The Chase financial empire was an international conglomerate with businesses ranging from real estate to aviation and technology. Bradley stepped forward. His face was pale. Chase, you don't mean Alexander Chase? The CEO of Chase International. Elizabeth nodded quietly. My ex-husband. Caroline had to grab a chair for support. You're lying, she said in a trembling voice. But you, living in that apartment. We divorced 7 years ago, Elizabeth explained calmly. I chose to live a normal life with Noah. Madison backed away and hid behind her mother. Her friends also moved to the edge of the venue as if escaping. Bradley's face grew increasingly pale. The Chase Group is the major shareholder of my company, he said with difficulty. Joseph grabbed his son's shoulder. What do you mean? The lead shareholder of my investment bank, Smith Financial Group, is Chase Investments, Bradley explained, his voice shaking. Essentially, our company is like a division of the Chase empire. Caroline's eyes widened in terror. For 7 years, she had looked down on her sister and treated her like a poor relative. But in reality, Elizabeth's ex-husband owned her new husband's company. She stared at Elizabeth, at a loss for words. Joseph hurried forward. Elizabeth, we didn't know. If you had told us earlier. What? Elizabeth interrupted him. You would have seated me differently. Treated Noah more kindly. She shook her head sadly. Is that what real family is about? Madison's mother, Patricia, pulling her daughter closer, said, Madison, apologize to Noah. Right now. Madison stepped forward fearfully. I'm sorry, she said in a small voice. Noah looked at her and simply nodded. It's okay, he said. A simple statement showing maturity. The venue door opened again, and a man in an expensive black suit entered. He was in his mid-40s, with sharp blue eyes and refined features. He looked very much like Noah. When he entered, the atmosphere in the room transformed. His presence dominated the room. Dad! Noah ran to him. Alexander Chase lifted his son and smiled gently. Hello, champion, he hugged Noah and then quietly approached Elizabeth. Elizabeth, he said softly. It's been a while. Alex, she smiled. Why are you here? Noah contacted me, he explained. Said it was your sister's wedding. Noah was worried you were sad. He looked around the room. It seems he was right. Caroline finally found her voice. Mr. Alexander Chase, meeting you like this was unexpected, she said in a shaking voice. If I had known in advance. What? Alexander asked calmly, but his eyes were cold. You wouldn't have seated my ex-wife and son at the edge of the venue? Caroline was at a loss for words. Bradley stepped forward and offered his hand. Mr. Chase, it's an honor to meet you. I'm Bradley Smith. Alexander ignored his hand. Mr. Smith, I know who you are. CEO of Smith Financial. Your presentation at last week's board meeting was less than impressive. The blood drained from Bradley's face. He lowered his hand and took a step back. Joseph hurriedly intervened. Mr. Chase, today is a day of celebration. If there's been any misunderstanding. Misunderstanding? Alexander said quietly. Mocking my son and insulting my ex-wife is a misunderstanding. He looked at Elizabeth. What do you want to do? All eyes turned to Elizabeth. She took a deep breath and placed her hand on Noah's shoulder. We don't intend to ruin Caroline's wedding. She's my sister, she looked at Caroline. Even if she sometimes forgets that. Caroline bowed her head in shame. Her perfect wedding had become something completely beyond her control. Alexander gazed at Elizabeth and smiled gently. Still kind as ever. He turned to Noah. Well, young man, what do we do? Go home. Noah looked up at his mother. Mom, let's go together, he said. We don't need to stay here anymore. Elizabeth looked at her son. His face showed the strength and kindness she had raised him with. She took Noah's hand and looked at Caroline. Congratulations, Caroline, she said quietly. I hope you'll be happy. Caroline was speechless. She began to cry, her makeup streaming down her face. She began to say, Elizabeth, But her voice broke. Alexander turned to Elizabeth and Noah. Shall we go? The car is waiting. He offered his arm to Elizabeth. Elizabeth took his arm and held Noah's hand. The three of them began to leave the venue. As they left, the venue fell silent again. Everyone was trying to process what had happened. The sudden appearance of an unexpected VIP at a luxury wedding had completely changed all power dynamics. Before reaching the door, Elizabeth stopped and turned around. Caroline, she said. Why don't you think about what real family means? Alexander opened the door, and the three of them left. Behind them, Caroline collapsed into a chair and began to cry. Her perfect day had turned into complete chaos. In the black limousine parked in front of the luxury hotel, Elizabeth took a deep breath. Her heart was filled with complex emotions. Are we really leaving? Noah asked worriedly. Aunt Caroline was crying. Elizabeth gently stroked her son's head. You're a kind child, she smiled. Alexander looked at the two of them and said quietly, Elizabeth, what's your decision? They must be wanting to apologize now. Elizabeth looked out the window. Indeed, Joseph and Bradley were hurriedly coming out of the hotel entrance. They were looking for the limousine. Noah, Elizabeth turned to her son. We are invited guests. Let's stay until the end. Noah looked surprised. Really? But everyone was mean to us. That's precisely why, Elizabeth said quietly. We must behave more elegantly than they did. Alexander smiled. You haven't changed, Elizabeth. That's your most beautiful quality. The three of them got out of the limousine and headed back to the venue. As they approached, Joseph hurried toward them. Mr. Chase, Miss Foster, he said breathlessly. Please come back. Please forgive our rudeness. Elizabeth smiled gently. No need to apologize. Today is Caroline and Bradley's special day. We want to respect that. When they returned to the venue, the atmosphere had transformed. Guests who had previously ignored them now stood up in respect for Elizabeth and Noah. Caroline rose from the bridal table and walked toward Elizabeth on shaking legs. Elizabeth, She struggled for words. Can you forgive me? Elizabeth looked at her sister and said quietly, family forgives each other. Caroline embraced her sister, crying. When you left, I felt terrified, she confessed in a small voice. It was as if everything I had done suddenly lost its meaning. Elizabeth gently patted her sister's back. Let's learn together what real family means. 1 month later, there was a knock on Elizabeth's apartment door. When she opened it, Caroline was standing there. She no longer had her previous arrogance, wore simple clothes, and had almost no makeup on. May I come in? She asked in a small voice. Elizabeth smiled and invited her sister in. Caroline sat on the living room sofa and sighed. How's married life? Elizabeth asked gently. Bradley is a good man, Caroline answered quietly. But his family. She broke off. They treat me just as they treated you. I'm not good enough, it seems. So now you know how it feels, Elizabeth said. Caroline began to cry. Elizabeth, what is real family? She asked in a trembling voice. Elizabeth took her sister's hand. Family is supporting each other. It's bound by love, not appearances or status. At that moment, the door opened, and Noah entered. And behind him was Alexander. Aunt Caroline. Noah exclaimed with a surprised expression. Alexander smiled gently and said, even though I'm the heir to a financial empire, I wanted Noah to have a normal childhood. That was the promise between Elizabeth and me. For the first time, Caroline understood the real reason behind her sister's choice. It was never about poverty, but a choice for true values.